Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of not Theory Forge Friday, but yes, by Theory Forge Revivalcast, episode 8. Today we have Astral back, we have Cicera again, and we have a very special guest, Kedhrin, the lead game designer and developer working on Revival. So, pretty big show. We have the topics kind of blog. The blog, again, of course, is the week already, and then we're really going to center this show around Kedhrin and, get as much time out of him as we can. So I know you guys probably are looking forward to what he has to say, so I'm going to pass it off to Astral and let him carry us forward.
Had myself muted. Yeah, good to be back. Honestly, passing it off to me is sort of useless because we have such a great guest on today, the big kahuna Kedhrin. So, Kedhrin, I'm really just going to pass this to you, and I think most of our audience is people who are, backers, or sorry, not backers, but founders, and people who follow the game and probably know who you are. But for anyone who's new to the game, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your role on the team?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the creative director on the project. So my job is to essentially manage the overall vision of the game and all the departments and make sure everything's kind of going in a very specific direction. So like the person pulling all the strings into one big picture that makes sense. And Revival is definitely a huge beast, and there's a lot of things that have to be considered. So I'm kind of the person that's just making sure everything works and fits and establishes what the game is, because everyone from art to design to programming, everyone's so focused on their individual tasks that it's like, it's kind of like making sure all those things work together and form the complete thing.
So how did you come into this role on Revival? Were you previously working in this role at Illfonic? I know you had worked with Omba and Snipe Hunter previously, right?
Yeah, so I worked with Snipe Hunter and Omba probably 10 years ago on Auto Assault, and that's when I first met them a long time ago, and they were my leads actually on that project, and we parted ways, but then I started Illfonic with my business partners, Charles Brungart and Raphael Sadiq, 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago. And we've worked on a few projects, and I kind of swore off working on MMOs forever. I was just like, I was tired of it, tired of every MMO being WoW and all that stuff, and I just got really burnt out on it, and we just kind of something happened, and I remember I was going out to California from Colorado, and I was talking to Adam. I'd go visit, and we would chat, and then we would eventually. I was just like, they just kept thinking about Revival and like, well, what would become Revival? Just more so like this kind of just epic game of like just freedom and living in a virtual world, and actually kind of how easy it would be. Well, theoretically, I say easy roughly, but like kind of to make this game and kind of the production techniques we have to take and all that stuff, and one thing led to another, and we were just playing around and started prototyping it, and then we started getting more heavily invested in it, and it just kind of turned into us finally just being like, hey, let's really shoot the gun on this and go full steam. So that's when I brought in Snipe Hunter and Omba full time to help me design the entire game and take everything to where it is now and just keep going forward.
Cool. So yeah, you've been working on this for a while, and it really is sort of the dream game for you guys. So it's awesome to see it all coming together. And it is coming together, which I think is so important to see. You guys have been showing us the houses in progress, which blew my mind. They are much larger than I anticipated. When you were touring the manses, I got to see what the one that I bought looks like, and I'm blown away. I'm floored. I have so many ideas of what I want to do with this thing. So that was just so cool to see that this is actually a thing. Obviously it's coming together now, but what sort of challenges have you guys faced along the way? Has there ever been a time where you guys said, okay, we really want to make the dream MMO, but, it's just not happening. If we're not going to make WoW, we're just not going to make something.
Yeah, it definitely is something that, my business partner Chuck and we talked about a lot is what's the reality of this, and that's why we came up with the 6 stages of development to capture the full vision, instead of traditional development on an MMO where you say, hey, I want this complete gigantic world of mass amounts of content in every direction, and you have to make all of it. Like, so you go into it and just it's a matter of, like, you know, trying to make a feast, and you can either focus on, all right, I'm going to make the sandwich, and then I'm going to add something else, I'm going to add something else, and add something else. Like, it's kind of like a weird, like, middle thing where it's like, okay, that makes sense, but now if you just go in there, I got to make this entire feast at once, right? Like, it's kind of like a weird, like, immediate self-defeating kind of, that's never going to happen type approach, right? Unless you have, because immediately, like, a lot of way, like, investments and publishers and developers work, we always look at games at, like, a dollar value, right? So, like, the other project we're working on, minus Star Citizen at Illfonic, is, you know, they're all based on, oh, we're going to spend X amount of money, so we're going to get Y amount of game, right? So we're like, we don't want to approach that with this, because you just can't, like, unless to truly make Revival, for example, just the same with Star Citizen, right? They're big vision games, and you can't just go in there and just be like, well, if we don't have X amount of money, we can't make the vision, right? So you just go, well, let's make a chunk of it, let's make a chunk of it, let's make a chunk of it, and then just keep going and keep going and keep going. And then the theory behind it is that as you're going, you open up the ability to, one, you're funding, well, for us, for Revival, we're funding it ourselves, but then we open the doors for players who believe in it, and fans who really like the game. They can get behind it and kind of, like, put a little bit of money in there too, and that just kind of feeds the machine, and so it can just keep going and going and going, and, like, it just starts snowballing, and then the game just starts getting made faster, and everything just starts piling in. So it's like that. To me, like, that's been the really interesting but kind of hard part about developing and planning for Revival. But it's cool because it's like, we don't have to essentially go to an investor. If we were trying to do the other way, where we were saying we need $100 million to make Revival, if we went to an investor and we said that, like, standard publishers or anything like that, they're going to want it to be WoW, because they're going to understand this quality bar brings in this money, and if you're going against that, then they can't have any faith in it for that amount of money. So it's a weird thing where you're kind of just like, well, we have to build, like, a fan base, and we have to prove that this game's going to work. We have to prove the mechanics are there. We have to prove everything's there, just to make sure that people can be like, oh shit, like, that's actually, it's working, you know. And I'm really happy that, you know, people are biting into the housing system, because for us, you know, at Illfonic, it proves that this theory can work, and it proves that people, more importantly, that people want this game to happen, and that to us is, like, that's the most important part, is, like, you have to make sure the fans really want that they're there. You can't just be like, oh yeah, this is a crazy game, and then no one bites. So, you know, we don't have, like, a crazy huge audience yet, but at the same time, we haven't really pushed to grow a massive audience yet, if that makes sense. Right now, we're really happy that we have a smaller group of, like, super badass fans, because then it's like, well, you know, again, it's a feast versus a sandwich. It's like, right now, it's like, cool, we got, like, a very vocal community that gives us lots of feedback, so let's harness that, and let's nurture that, and then let's make sure everything's perfect and don't lose the slow and steady wins the race kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, it's really intriguing to me, because our audience is pretty familiar. We've brought it up several times, the whole deployment phase, development, the way you guys are doing this. But specifically with Theory Forge, we've talked a lot about, you know, how MMOs kind of get developed in a certain way, and it really wasn't until, you know, like, EverQuest Next came around with their emergent AI, and, you know, what you guys want to do with your AI. You know, I don't feel like without that the game could really be successfully built in this phase deployment, because, you know, people would consume the content so quickly. But this new concept that, you know, what you guys are doing, and a few other games out there are pursuing, of, you know, really changing the way AI works, you know, building it from scratch totally differently, makes that possible, to where you can have a lot of gameplay and content just in one, you know, in one small area, and then grow out from there. Where'd you guys get that idea? Is that something you guys were talking about way back when you first were talking about Revival, or is it something you've kind of been inspired by other things out there or recent developments?
Well, so when we first started in the last engine we were using, when we were using CryEngine for Revival, that was we were making a map. Like if you look at the earlier screenshots we released, it has like the guy in the big armor and like the woods and all that stuff. And that first prototype version, we were aiming more for traditional, like in the sense where we were like, let's get a solid badass. The level was huge. I think it was 2 square kilometers. It was big, gigantic, thick wooded area. I don't know if you guys saw the video that of the early like footage. Like it was insanely detailed area, and we were trying to just make this really cool small area, and then try to get funding off that. So that was kind of our goal. And I would definitely say that taking that and then in a hybrid of inspiration from what we saw CIG was doing with Star Citizen, definitely inspired us to like be like, okay, we can kind of do this same thing where we're aiming small to make a super badass thing, but then we can also introduce elements of getting community involved early, but not really. We took the approach instead of, we don't want people to think, and I've said this before, that we're relying on crowdfunding, because it's like crowdfunding essentially is saying if the community is not spending money, then we're fucked, which isn't our case. It helps, it certainly does help every time, the cash we get from the houses just certainly helps stuff. Like we can, buy like a new freelance person or something like that and like get some extra work in, but it doesn't, even if every single, and I've said this before, even if every single house that we have available for sale right now, the 5,000 first offering, if every single one of those houses for sale sold, it definitely would not, fund the game, but it certainly would help. But more so, it's there to like prove the theory, engage the community, establish the base, and essentially make it so we can really springboard off forward. And that's kind of what Star Citizen is doing a little bit. Theirs is they're certainly more crowdfunding base, and it's worked out very well for them, we see that even on our work with that, and about to release the FPS module on Star Citizen. Like it's really cool, but I do think they're different, but we definitely did get some inspiration from how they're doing it.
We can see for sure from the streams of the housing that a lot of the benefits that the stage approach is affording you guys. But I was wondering, so your conversation over at MMO Games was a lot about housing and monetization, and there seems to be a lot of interest in this approach, but also a lot of worry. And you've sort of spoke to this already, but I was wondering if you think that maybe some people are missing the point of what you're trying to do with this.
Yeah, I think that some people are going to get it, some people aren't. At the end of the day, I really feel that that's kind of really, we understood that the houses, and that's why we kind of have so many of the there's a shit ton of the Sta ones, the tiny tenement building for like $30 and stuff. They're pretty cheap. And I've told people this, on the forums, and if you don't feel comfortable buying a house and you don't feel comfortable, don't do it. Like I'm not trying to bully or trick people into buying stuff that they don't feel safe or confident in or anything like that. Like if you don't feel comfortable, don't do it, but still get involved with the community, hang around, and if you feel confident one day, then maybe get involved and maybe get a tenement building at the start, or when the boats come online, maybe that's more your thing. But I think there's just such an insane passion with us from Illfonic making this game that to me, the thought of us not making this is almost like, I don't know, it's just like, oh no, that's not gonna happen, like so it's like we're definitely we're more than fully invested in this project. We have other games going on at Illfonic, and that certainly we have key people at Illfonic, for example, that work on projects. Myself, I'm one of them. I'm the creative director for the company, but I'm creative point for all projects except one we have in-house right now. So I'm definitely like sprinkled across projects. So that's like, my focus shifts a lot. Like our main engineers, they shift a lot. But how we're doing it is something very interesting. Is we're taking a lot of these projects that we're working on, and a lot of the theory behind how certain things are done is almost like for example, we have a multiplayer game, and the way like a server talks to a client in a certain way in the back end, how it receives data, is a theory that we're developing for that project, right? But we're always keeping it in mind for Revival. So it's like these other projects are happening, and we're essentially that technology, we're dumping it right back into Revival. The like any animation pipelines we're doing for other projects, and it's not Star Citizens because that's CryEngine stuff, but like UV4 stuff. All that stuff's dumping right back into Revival. So it's kind of like there's a focus not just in the profit Illfonic makes and we dump in, not just the profit that the fans bring us, but also all these other projects and the technology we're building behind them, which is the most difficult part, and that stuff's just rolling back into Revival. So that's a really interesting way we're going forward with it. And it's kind of something similar to what how Gearbox made like Borderlands and stuff. They were doing a lot of work for hire type projects, and in the background they were making Borderlands and Band of Brothers or whatever, and kind of got that their own stuff started that way.
Yeah, going back to that whole pacing system where you are releasing it, I want to say piecemeal. Did you read Rafe Koster's most recent blog about Star Wars Galaxies? I know it was floating out there at the end of last week.
I did it. I'm sorry.
No, I mean you're out at a conference, so I totally understand. No, I mean I thought it was really interesting. So the gist of it was basically, he's talking about Star Wars Galaxies and the development cycle that it went through, and he wrapped it around the concept of Jedi and how that decision came to be. But it also exposed a lot of things about that game's development, and their development pipeline from concept to beta was, I want to say, something like 8 months, maybe a little longer than that. I think it was from like August to May, about that much time. And they had to launch without content development tools. They had a team of basically QA people and customer service people being trained to place point of interests into the world. It seems, I think of Star Wars Galaxies as the last great sandbox, and it had so many great features, and then to realize that what we got was actually still just this shadow of a game. I think it really highlights the dangers of trying to do all of that at once. And yes, there are certainly AAA MMO studios that can do that. But even then, if we look at recent releases and we look at how they've been received, I don't think anyone's really hit success to the point that they've wanted to within the past 10 years.
Yeah, I think that, it really boils down to, like, if you look at our stage, our 6 stages, our content, like as far as the world and art team, is wrapping up very fast. Like, so the way the teams are going to work is we have Crowns Rock, the interior of the house is the offline city, of course, and then the online city. And so that's the city on the island. And then you have, there's various other NPCs. There's like a cathedral in the city and all that stuff. There's some detail we got to do. But then we're moving on to the posing island, which is where we're going to introduce like combat and stuff like that. And that's not a very big piece of land still. So the art content team's workload after the city really starts to drop. Like as far as if we were just that's it. So what's really going to happen is immediately after that point, they're going to start working on the big continent. Like that's going to be the first release after stage 6. So the content team, the art content team, is essentially just moving on, and what that's giving us is this beautiful island, Crowns Rock, and it's a side island, to just be like, let's just small, tiny area, and let's pump every single mechanic we can and choose our battles now for what we think is the encompassing vision of Revival, and make sure we hit these major points like as strong as possible on a small scale, because it is sandbox. It's supposed to just, theoretically, it's supposed to just work everywhere, right? So we just make sure in this small area everything is perfect, pick our battles, and then once we go to the big continent, the art content will already be there. So the design team and everyone's just like, they just have a field trip with this beautiful land, kind of with mechanics that are already amazing, So it's theoretically it's a great way to do things, but like as far as this small focus and stuff of implementation, I haven't seen something like that big. As far as like the content and features, I haven't seen something done like that on an MMO before, so it's going to be an interesting learning experience for sure.
Yeah, another, our familiarity with EverQuest Next and them choosing an open development, that was something that we hadn't seen. And for them, it's been rough so far, but to me it looks like your guys' ride is a lot better. Just the whole system seems a lot more sound, kind of what you guys are planning to do. And I think one of the key things is you guys have really been, from my perspective, it seems like the development cycle has been planned really to fit the game, to fit what the game is. We talked a little bit about it last week of how, just getting this immersion and this RP experience by, as being a core focus of the game, and the way the development phase rolling out, people getting to be in their houses, live in them for a while before they even start, exploring the city and meeting other people. It kind of has this natural progression of actually building immersion prior to the game actually launching even. So I'm a big fan of it, and as somebody who's kind of really critical, I've gotten really critical lately of the way games have gone and done their early accesses and stuff, and so far it's this is such a solid one. I like to point it out when I can, because it's definitely different, and you guys are doing something a bit risky in the fact that you're operating blind, kind of in some sense. Nobody's done this. You're pioneering, so it's pretty cool. I'm hoping it continues to go well. So far, it looks like it's going great, and I like the progress you guys have made.
Glad you like it. And I would say, the EverQuest team, they got that whole voxel technology, that's insane. So when you're dealing with proprietary and something like a new technology like that, you definitely have an insanely different obstacle in front of you that you have to really counter, and like with Revival, we're just like, we have some fancy live storytelling is our big, fancy point, but other than that, we don't want to introduce like crazy new technologies like that because of stuff like that, like then all of a sudden it's always going to be something we have to constantly deal with. Like I've worked on games that have done crazy. I worked on this game where the entire environment was destroyable, and it was a nightmare. Like I had solid design, FPS mechanics, and they just all went out the window whenever we started implementing it. And I was constantly fighting against it. And in the end product was shit, because we had to release, and the technology just kept changing the design, and they could never match up, and the tech just took forever to make, and so we're just like, let's focus on badass gameplay mechanics and not revolutionary technology right now. And that's why we really went with UE4, because it was just everything's there and everything works and looks great. So
yeah, absolutely. I think the development pipeline is much more realistic, because you guys you're not reinventing the wheel, but you're also not building the same wheel that everyone else has built for 10 years. You're just going back to some design concepts that exist out there, but just haven't been picked up on, haven't been reutilized, haven't been tooled to work for the modern era. I think back to the Rafe Koster blog, and he mentions that they had this whole system of animals and creatures reacting to players with moods and reacting to terrain, and potentially being driven off a cliff if they're scared enough. And it's like, well, if they could do this in 2002, 2003, and they just had to shut it off because the server couldn't support it at the time, why haven't we seen that in the last, it's been 12 years now?
Absolutely.
So one of the other things, well, first of all, I want to say that you may not be doing voxel technology, but there are so many new things that Revival is doing, and we all think it's very ambitious. So we really hope that works out, and especially, the storytelling, that's something I'm really looking forward to. One of the things we're all looking forward to is how guilds are going to be implemented. We're all in a guild together ourselves, and we feel like charter organizations are a huge part of communities and role-playing communities. And so there was, the blog this week, number 23, that talked about the guilds and the charter organizations and the secret societies. And I was just wondering what your direction and vision was for that.
I think a big thing with us is, and it definitely ties into a lot of what Adam Holtorf and I have been driving forward with, especially with the political system of Revival, and how that, social economics is such a big part of everything, right? And so that really boils down to, guilds, secret societies. I mean, it's like just like in real life, like a lot of the weird things we do, and I would definitely say that. And our Revival designs is we're comparing a lot of stuff to real life, and we're trying to mimic it because again, we're trying to push for a virtual world. So there has to be that kind of when you connect and you jump in, and if you have those disconnects of you hate that part about the real life. I mean, yeah, certain things we're not putting in there, of course, because it's a game. But there are other things where you're just like, oh fuck, like politics, that sucks. But then once if you start becoming a merchant, you start becoming successful and wealthy, then you're like, wait a minute, these politics is actually now suddenly really cool. Or if you're in a mercenary guild and you're like, you and your friends are just like killing monsters or whatever, badasses, and you're hunting like murderers and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden these political powers come reaching in and being like, hey, we actually need your help, and then you all of a sudden don't have political power now, and your guild gets involved, and then over time you establish yourselves as like a major force and potentially could even take over the city. So that's like, those things all kind of like, they're all super, super intertwined. And I think, the concept of the guilds and the secret societies and stuff, we talked about this, and Adam like really drilled this down very well with the idea behind, secret societies is if you don't want to be in the spotlight, but then a guild is if you do want to be in the spotlight, well, not necessarily in the spotlight, but you do want to have the ability to be involved more. But then also with secret societies, you don't want to be in the spotlight because you might be doing some shady shit, right? Or if you're in a bad area, you might be doing some good stuff. So like you're always like trying to position yourselves in like a political cat and mouse, like almost like Game of Thrones-y type system with the city state and other players and trying to be noticed. And we think that stuff's really, really important for this type of game world. And then the amount of interactivity you're going to have with the NPCs is critical for that. Because if it was just players, like most MMOs are just, it's all players and players interaction, and maybe you have some dynamic system at the top that just randomly spits out numbers and stuff like that. But it's not like this. Like if you're like a let's say like a murdering like secret society in like a very nice city, you might be killing things, and then there might be good players might come and hunt you down, but that may not happen. So the way our NPC system, they'll start engaging you. So you might have the city guard might start hunting you down all the time, or we'll start like spin up a negative kind of karma secret society guild as well, and that will start like interacting with you, and you almost like start creating like this bond behind the scenes with an NPC driven system that its purpose there is to essentially entice more player involvement. It's not, we're not trying to be like, fuck player interaction. It's the NPC interaction is always just there, just gotta poke sticks at getting players involved. So if we see something that's like happening in a city between guilds and stuff, like I don't know, there's a lot of crazy stuff that that can really happen with this thing. But it's I don't know, it's really cool how guilds can be established when you come into a city and there's already guilds there, and you have the potential to like stamp them out and replace them with your own guild, or you can rise to the ranks of an established NPC guild and you could become the leader of it and change it, and all sorts of things. It's really cool.
Yeah, I really like how the guild system is set up to really integrate players within the game world. I mean, we look at the modern MMO, and a guild is basically a glorified chat channel. You might have some achievements tied to it, shared storage, something like that. But for the most part, it's a social structure that doesn't really matter in the scope of the actual game. When I think about how it's going to work in Revival, I'm so excited by the idea of, I mean, you're basically, especially with the charter organizations, you are committing yourself to a city, you are becoming an integral part of that city's operations. You are declaring yourself and your role, and then you actually have to fulfill it. If you say, okay, well, I'm going to be a mages guild, and you have NPCs coming to you or players coming to you asking you for whatever help they need from whatever your knowledge is of Arcana, and then you're like, oh no, we don't do that shit, all we do is raid. Well, you're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I was gonna jump on there too with just the fact that this kind of guild structure adds so much meaning, and instead of being this bolt-on system, it's actually adding layers to it. Having the different secret society and the different ways that you can do things, it almost feels like your guild itself is something, like it's its own character in a way. It's got a different race and class, so it's got a flavor beforehand, and it's not on the onus of the guild to create everything from scratch. They kind of can select a defined purpose in the city and build from there. And I think that adds a lot of value to people that might not have the creative energy to think up all this crazy stuff. They can just kind of pick something and act it out, and they get to act and be a part of the social structure among other guild contention without having to take on the other dives that a lot of guilds might have to in other MMOs.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is I like to compare it to like American politics with you got Republicans, Democrats, and then you got the smaller third party kind of parties, and they have their agendas and what they're supposed to be doing and what their party stands for, and it's. I would say we definitely, and we've talked about this before, where we tune things in the background, it's not, I don't think we want to be to the point to where there's like a hard, like as bad as it is in America, where there's like Republicans and Democrats and that's it, pretty much. But it definitely, like, you'll see a lot of that kind of stuff start happening, and you're going to even see that, like, there might be a guild in one city and in another city struggling, but they might be able to be like, hey, let's start a charter in this city, but the city's going to have to essentially play victim to that guild because it's so powerful, but they're going to bring X amount of money to the city, so it's kind of like it's a weird bullying political system that can really change a lot of things about the world, and it's really going to be cool.
So then with the politics and how it's working with guilds, I can imagine that there's going to be some drama, there's going to be some pamphlets and gossip, and the other thing that the blog mentioned was the guild badges, and also how guilds will be linked to housing, that you actually need, well, not for a secret society, but for a charter organization, you need housing to do that. So I think between the politics and the badges and the housing, guilds are going to have their very specific aesthetic. And I was wondering how you feel that will be and how it will fit in with Crowns Rock.
With Crowns Rock, we're gonna be introducing some light guild stuff. It may not be fully all over the place in Crowns Rock right out of the gates, especially. But I think it's all about positioning, right? I mean, we want things to happen organically. We've always been kind of in the mindset of, it's the push the bird out of the nest theory versus, we're not going to tell you how the bird lands or anything like that. We have to watch what happens with players. So we're going to develop the systems of theoretically what's going to happen if, for example, all players in a neighborhood, all of them build a guild themselves, right? And then you have a neighborhood full of individual guilds, and it's just full of it. We have to see what happens. Like, that's kind of our stance. Is we don't necessarily, we have rules in place, but we're not going to be like so anti everything out of the gates. It's like a lot of the times it's let's see, because more than likely you might have one of those guilds out of all those guilds in that area becomes more dominant, and they kind of just soak up all the ones around them, or the ones that are trying to establish a guild, no one wants to play with them, they just kind of give up and fizzle out. And again, it's the same thing with a political party in real life. Like that's the same kind of system that's going to happen. And if you look at Crown's Rock, it's kind of like a proving grounds for that. If that happened, with Crown's Rock, it's going to be difficult because Crown's Rock's isolated on an island. We really need the interconnecting cities to really, 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 really take advantage of this system, because it's within a city of politics, but that within city politics needs to branch to a neighboring city, and then the neighboring city, if they're in the same nation or if they're independent city states, then all that type of thing needs those types of things. And then we deal with different politics of different cities. Like one city's a democracy and another city's like a dictatorship. How do guilds interact with each other? So it's like, I don't think with Crown's Rock it's necessarily ready for that. Maybe one day, but that's I don't know. I think I don't know if I'm answering the question. I'm kind of just rambling right now. But
I did want to throw a quick shout out to I think it was Donnie Ergo who submitted that. I think Snipe pointed out in the blog, which is another cool thing you guys are doing here. Taking the good ideas that the community submits and actually putting them in if they fit your guys' vision is really cool. And the guild badges thing specifically, on the topic we're on, I like that you guys have these elements of because this game is so information based. There's these hidden tags that we don't know about that we're carrying, and it's about what you know and don't know. And I think the fact that you guys are choosing to kind of go towards this thing where you can hide your guild or show it, you can and there's not all this display of information. It's really selective. It creates this another level strategy kind of into the politics and into guilds and into all these different systems. It's very, very interesting. How much of that is something you guys were planning from the beginning, and how much of it kind of came just as you were developing this process and thought?
A lot of times the way Adam Holtorf and I work, we have a general idea, and that's what we want to turn the series that Adam Holtorf and I started. We want to start that into a regular thing, but we have a very interesting dynamic where we have a general idea of a game design system, and we sit on it for a little bit. Maybe just one of us has the idea, and then we all three just kind of jump in a room and we just chat and we talk about it, and with our experience of knowing what's possible, what's not possible, the technical limitations and all that stuff. A lot of the times you will see, like, we will design a game mechanic sometimes within an hour that's we've kind of had like a broad topic on, and then that's just like we'll hash it out in like an hour and that'll be it. Like a lot of the stuff we're talking about with the guilds and secret societies, Adam had just to go on to that point, is he had written down his general ideas on it. And we just sat in a room, we talked about it, and then that was it. And it was like, okay, that's cool. Like it's like I've never had that kind of work relationship with anyone ever. Like it's never that easy with designers and creative heads. Like there's always some bickering or there's always some issues and stuff like that. But Adam Holtorf and I are just always on point, and we're all on the same page, and we just hash things out very fast, which is really cool. And when community gives us feedback and stuff and some ideas, it's always interesting because a lot of the times it's someone might be like kind of wedge in and like expose something where we haven't really thought about too much. So like then we might, or sometimes they'll give us an idea that's like completely overriding of what we're already thinking, and sometimes you're like, hey, that's a better fucking idea. Let's do that. If we give credit where credit's due. So we love that kind of stuff.
Okay, cool. So sort of still on the subject of guilds, I actually saw a question come through from the community that I think is pretty awesome. So Baby Cannon asks, are guild tags set by the leaders, or do they change or evolve automatically based on guild members' actions?
So generally everything is, you have karma, right? And so you the NPCs in the world and certain things will react to you dynamically based on that. But you essentially, just like in real life, you present yourself how you want to be perceived. But if people know you're just because you're dressed up really nice that you're still a scumbag, your actions kind of follow you. So it's like you can present yourself, but there's certain skills that you're going to be able to use based on what that person is and what the guild is, or whatever they're trying to push. Like, for example, if you're dealing with merchants and players who do business, and you have like high skill levels in something that they're trying to get involved with, you might be able to detect something's wrong or something like that. So it's yes and no. I mean, it's really, you need to establish how you want to be perceived, but sometimes if you're so bad in the opposite direction of what you're trying to perceive, you just can't hide it, and everyone's going to notice it. It's if you're dealing with necromancy, for example, and you're trying to say you don't, but you do it all the time, people are going to be able to tell that you do it all the time just by looking at you. So that's kind of where that's going. That's not really, I wouldn't say we're sold on that yet, but that's kind of, we want people to be able to hide themselves and be discreet with their, but at the same time not be completely invisible to people who are able to see through the disguise, so to speak.
So I'm going to twist this one a little bit, sort of on that same theme of how players can impact guilds. I mean, we hear about how being in a guild and the type of guild that you're in will have some influence on how you're perceived. Let's say that it's a Zerg guild, right? Let's say you've got someone who decides that they want to create a guild, and they'll pick whatever type of guild that they want to create, and they invite every single newbie that exists in the game. Is this system going to impact the health of those types of guilds?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like for example, yeah, you're gonna have the fresh off the boat, the new players coming in there. You're gonna have guys sitting there, and that's probably part of their hazing job, is to try to recruit all the new players as they come in. And you flood your system with people. But again, going back to, if your guild's not doing what they say they're doing, if they're the guild of like cutting down wood, right? That's your lumberjacking guild, whatever, and you're recruiting every new player that comes into the game to be the lumberjacking guild, but only 2% of your members even cut wood. Then the relevance of your guild is going to be worse. Like, you're going to have an insane amount of players, sure, but it's like your percentage of your active members is going to seriously impact your guild's rating within the city. So it definitely is. You need to make sure your guild actually active and doing what they're supposed to be doing. You can't just be like farming new players all the time, and that's going to happen. You see that in every game that has guilds. Like, I'm very thankful we're not doing world chat, because you would see that spam, and you see that in every MMO now. There's people just spamming, hey, join my guild, or I'm selling something, and just complete immersive breaking stuff. So, but you will have the guy running around in town just yelling, hey, join us, we're awesome, blah blah blah, and the new player's sitting there, I don't have any friends, and joins them, and then finds out no one will talk to him because it's just a sea of people, and no one really has any organization, and then the guild doesn't really get anywhere, but it has a ton of people. So it's kind of like it's like a dirty street gang versus like a well-oiled I don't know, like mob family or something like that.
Yeah, it almost,
that's really cool. Sorry,
I was just gonna say it's really cool that you guys are taking into consideration some ideas that to fix things that have plagued guild systems for a long time in other MMOs, and kind of have detracted from the intended purpose of those things, because that zerging thing is a big problem. But it sounds like you guys have something in there that can at least help mitigate it with this kind of self-defeating type of system. If you're doing something just for pure numbers, it's not going to have the type of impact that it does in other games, where numbers certainly add up and stack way differently than they will in your guys' game.
Yeah, it's the sort of mechanistic rewarding quality over quantity. As opposed to, take World of Warcraft for example, the more people you have, the faster your guild levels, the faster you can get to your max rank. And I have a friend who literally just created a guild, started recruiting everyone that he could just to get his own guild to 25, kicked everyone, and then had a level 25 guild because that's what he wanted. I think that systems like that just don't work. They reward the wrong type of gameplay. And of course, if you do have a guild where you have 250 people who are completely focused on your goal as opposed to 250 people who are all over the place, or 15 people who are only focused on your goal, the 250 people who are all on the same page versus the 15 are still going to have that advantage. But at least, you know that you've cultivated the right community.
And you run into the danger, with the real world socioeconomic stuff is, like if you're the lumberjacking guild, for example, and all 100% of your members are meeting your agenda and you guys are killing it, but you belong to a city that doesn't give a shit about lumberjacking, for example, right? Like, what do you do? Like, your guild's going to be an amazing standing, but the city doesn't care about you. The city's like, well, you're bringing money to us, but, the players are running the political background, or even if it's NPC driven at that point, they're like, we're focused on, fishing, for example. Like, they maybe say, oh, yeah, you guys are lumberjacking, but it's not where we need to be. We want to make sure that you have to deal with that type of situation, so you can either try your hardest to influence it over time and you'll just be those guys that are just well established, or just be like, what, you're kind of independent and you're dealing with players instead, and you stop caring about the city politics. But that's just the brutal nature of that. It's like, if the city you belong to is not going in your direction, you might want to consider moving cities even. So that's it's a very serious thing, so it's not a guarantee, which is, I think it's important to note. It's like, just because you're doing well doesn't mean the world's going to just be like, oh, you're doing well, let's pat you on the back and say everything's awesome,
Definitely. Cersei wants to know on the topic of guilds. She would like more details on how the guild tag system works, with, say, random example of scholarly society.
I'm going to be perfectly honest, and I would say I would like to divert those type of questions to Snipe Hunter, because the tagging system, I'll be perfectly honest, I know the high level of it, but I don't know Snipe's intended functionality of all the super little tiny details off the back of my head.
Oh, we can ask Skype that. Maybe we'll have him on again. We have another question from Legendary Neurotoxin, and this one's about graphics. EQ2 and WoW got graphic updates and still look super old. Is there a game plan for continuing to upgrade the quality and fidelity of art every few years as top-end graphics reach new standards?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it seems like in my opinion, it's an easy thing to, I hate saying that word, but because people are like, that's not easy, but in the grand scheme of things, what I'm used to dealing with, it's a lot easier than it sounds. It's not as difficult. Because we're building everything, what I talked about, like in the tier system, right? Like the modularity and everything's in prefabs. That's the whole purpose of that. Is so if we're like not just updating graphics, but also being like, hey, if we want this wall to be brown in every instance, if throughout the entire game, or we update one prefab and it changes everywhere in the game. So that's like, updating graphics isn't that much of an issue as long as we stay firm to the tier system, because it's, update once, everything updates. In a game like EverQuest or World of Warcraft, everything is, well, not everything, but most things are, handmade for that one instance, and then they move on. So if they were going to update everything, they have to go through everything, like in hand touch up every single little detail. And so it definitely pushes you in a corner for updates where it just becomes more unrealistic. And it's also important to remember games like EverQuest, for example, their fan base, the original EverQuest especially, their fan base is still stuck on those old computers. They're still, they're very much stuck in their ways. And pushing too much of a graphics updates on them is going to be bad, because you're not necessarily going to be pulling in any new fans or an audience on a game that old. It's like trying to update Ultima Online right now, right? Like, if you were to just drop in like a fancy new renderer all over the place on UO, it may not make sense, because UO has like such an insane like following in like Brazil and stuff like that, where you have lower end machines. The same with World of Warcraft. They have a bigger focus of, we want to be low spec and high spec at the same time, so you have to have that's why everything's generally low res, and they can't really push it too much, because it'll start like alienating chunks of their audience that can't, afford a computer to run it. Or Revival, I believe that it's our job and our duty as game developers to push graphics and push the industry forward with everything we do and at every turn. So I don't believe in scalability. And there's a business person somewhere like cringing in the heart when I say that, and I'm saying it very loosely. And I'm talking like I'm aiming for machines like 5 years ago to be our min specs. Like that's kind of where I'm going. Where World of Warcraft is aiming like 10, 15 years ago at their min specs. So it's those are things to keep in mind whenever you're dealing with graphics and graphic updates, especially on machines that have fan followings from such a large, very varied group of players.
Yeah, well, hopefully, as long as Revival doesn't encounter the Anarchy Online situation where the game has been running for, 14 years, and 8 of those now have been spent working on an engine upgrade. So it's more time spent doing that. More than half the game's total lifespan. It's kind of ridiculous. So Diggs asks, what stage do you think the badges and crests for guilds might appear? And he also mentions that a banner in houses would be nice when possible.
You'll probably start seeing that around stage 5 and 6. It's going to be it's a lesser. I'm not saying it's not important, but it is a lesser feature considering the other mechanics we're trying to dive in and kill. So a lot of the stuff that are in the later stages, we haven't fully listed out. Hey, this feature's coming here, this feature's coming, blah blah blah, because we want to focus on the ones that we know we need to tackle first. And if there's going to be time when we're just like, okay, it's going to take us, when combat comes in especially, it's going to take us a long time to get that working very well, right? So during that phase, we might have engineers just go, oh, let's throw in the guild system too, so you might see it sneak in there. But essentially what we're going to do is at the beginning of the stage, we're going to analyze it and be like, okay, what other features can we fit into this time,
We have another question from Legendary Neurotoxin. How apparent will occult and supernatural things be when players interact with them? And also add, we're running down, so if you want to take this question, run with it, talk about the occult aspects of Revival and how, as creative director, you see those coming to fruition and what you hope for the game.
I think it's important, this goes back to, like the hiding the tag versus, like, is it apparent type stuff. Like if you're, and this goes really deep within our madness system too. If you're touching fire, you're going to look burnt, you just can't do much against it. There certainly are things you can do to, disguise yourself. But it will be apparent. And I think, with anything you do, it's and especially dealing with the cult stuff in the game, like there's tons of that. Like there's consequence, right? The more you dive into it, the more powerful you could be. But definitely the more witch in the woods you're going to become. Like people they're gonna notice that. That's why magic's so difficult in the world of revivals, because we want to make it something to where if players are magic oriented or cult oriented and they start diving in that realm, they're going to very quickly alienate themselves from the rest of the players, because NPCs will be the first to start rejecting you, and players would definitely start, because players, if they interact with you too much, if they trade with you and stuff like that, they will get karma impacts just for dealing with you. It's a you really do start getting that feeling. So you will have like the covenant of like witches type thing, where the witches start getting all gnarly and no one wants to get near them. And you guys might be super powerful, so you might have people that you deal with that deals with everybody else, and you have like stages of interaction. But it's going to be one of those things that players have to really, really pay attention to and understand the sacrifices of doing anything too much. It's a consequence for anything and too much. Especially with anything dealing with the magic and the occult madness, especially madness. Like you can quickly fuck your character, but not be unplayable. Just it's like, well, you're locked into this, and the road back is going to be really difficult. So I don't know if that answered that, but
Yeah, I think it did. I really like the theme of this game, and I like the way that you guys are taking, what the game is about and kind of applying it to all your decision making. It feels like, between the deployment, between the way you're doing guilds, like you're understanding that. I mean, and I know it sounds silly to point this out, but I know it's because I feel like the greater view out there for MMORPGs. Like, what does a RPG even mean in an MMORPG anymore? Like, nobody, developers don't emphasize it. They don't actually make their games. And when they use that tag, they're using it on games that don't even necessarily fit that concept of a role-playing game. I mean, nowadays, an MMORPG, the role-playing is purely combat oriented. You have a combat role and that's about it. And I like that you guys are kind of taking what this term has meant for a long time and actually giving it new meaning again, kind of restoring or I guess reviving the meaning of this terminology and actually applying that to all of your decisions. So you definitely have people that understand what you're doing and that are a big fan of it. So I hope it continues to grow. We enjoy doing this show and having guests like you on, and it's great too. Any guest we get is awesome, but it's really great when we can get somebody on that's so core to the development, you and the other developers, to express how you guys feel, your mindset coming into this, so that people can start catching on to this whole concept, because I think it is, not mainstream anymore. It's just not something the average MMO player understands these days, and so hopefully it catches fire at the right time for you guys. I don't know, if you necessarily need it now. I like what you guys are doing, and I hope that things ramp up for you guys, exactly when you want them to. So, but thank you so much for coming. I think we are running up towards the end of our hour here. We do have a couple minutes left. Did you guys have any last questions for Kedhrin before we close out?
You know what? I'm going to ask the obligatory one. Not quite when does Revival release, or even when does Stage 1 release, as much as I want to ask that. I'm sure I won't get an answer. But do you guys still feel like you're on track? Or I know the website mentioned 2017 to get as far as Stage 6.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think Stage 1 is going so well. There's definitely has been some hiccups. But I think there's certain things we thought were going to be a huge pain in the ass that are turning out to be a lot easier. And that's always the joy of development. And as we go forward, that's why I don't say dates, because it's such we take on a new task and we always are like, oh man, that's going to be so difficult. And what I'm really loving with Unreal Engine 4 is usually those things are like, wow, okay, we're done. And so that's really cool. So it's always... Yeah, I think 2017 I still feel comfortable with, but like you said, and I stress enough, like I don't want to push anything. If it's not ready, it's not ready. But I do think that that's fair, and we don't want to be working on this game through Stage 6 for like 5 years. That's like I just don't. I want to get this done. And I want to play it. So it's we're just certainly trying to march forward.
Yeah,
Awesome.
well, whenever it comes out, we hope it's everything you want it to be and what we want it to be. So thanks so much for coming on, Kedhrin. Always love hearing what you have to say, whether that's here or in the live streams that Revival's doing. I just wanted to mention that we were going to do the Whisper in Darkness this week. We'll probably do it next week, as well as talk about Ombo's blog, his new Day in the Life series. So Astral, do you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm all set. So thank you again, Kedhrin. This was awesome. Great to have you on the show. And we'll see everyone else next week.
Ta-ta, everybody. We will see you later.